Hisashi Uchi, 1999. Hisashi Uchi, a 35-year-old technician at the JCO uranium reprocessing facility in Tokaimura, Japan, became the victim of the worst criticality accident in history on September 30, 1999. While manually mixing a uranium solution in a precipitation tank, bypassing safety protocols due to rushed production demands, he and two colleagues triggered an uncontrolled nuclear chain reaction. A blue flash of Cherenkov radiation filled the room as neutrons and gamma rays bombarded Uchi, delivering an estimated 17 to 20 sieverts of acute radiation exposure, over 3 times the lethal dose and the highest ever recorded in a human. Within minutes, he vomited violently, felt intense burning, and collapsed. His coworkers suffered lesser but still fatal doses. Rushed to the National Institute of Radiological Sciences and later transferred to the University of Tokyo Hospital, Uchi initially appeared stable but deteriorated rapidly as radiation destroyed his bone marrow, gut lining, and chromosomal structure, rendering cell division impossible. By day 2, his white blood cell count plummeted to near zero, inviting rampant infections. Doctors initiated aggressive supportive care, daily blood and platelet transfusions, sometimes dozens per day, granulocyte colony-stimulating factors, and experimental peripheral blood stem cell transplants from his sister. Yet his epidermis began sloughing off in large sheets, described by nurses as melting, exposing glistening muscle and fat. Mucous membranes in his mouth, throat, and intestines disintegrated, causing constant bloody diarrhea and inability to swallow. He developed severe fluid shifts, massive internal hemorrhaging, and respiratory distress requiring mechanical ventilation. Around week 2, he lost the ability to eat and relied on total parenteral nutrition. Pain was unrelenting. Nerve damage caused burning sensations across his body, while organ failure led to jaundice, kidney shutdown, and repeated cardiac arrests. He suffered 3, each time resuscitated against his pleas. By month 2, his chromosomes were so fragmented that cells appeared as debris under microscopes. Skin grafts failed as his body rejected them. He repeatedly begged staff, including in tearful, whispered pleas, to stop treatment and let him die. But Japanese medical ethics and family wishes prolonged interventions. Over 83 days, his body literally decomposed while alive. Fluids leaked from every orifice, infections turned wounds necrotic, and multi-organ failure culminated in cardiac arrest on December 21, 1999. The case remains a stark medical and ethical tragedy, highlighting radiation's irreversible cellular destruction and the limits of prolonging life at immense cost and suffering. Robert François Damiens, 1757. Robert François Damiens, a 42-year-old former soldier and domestic servant plagued by mental instability and religious fervor, attempted to assassinate King Louis V on January 5, 1757, at Versailles. Using a small penknife, he inflicted only a shallow 1 to 2 centimeters wound between the king's 4th and 5th ribs, barely piercing the skin due to thick clothing, yet the act was deemed regicide. Arrested immediately, Damiens endured weeks of interrogation under torture before his trial condemned him to an elaborately cruel public execution on March 28, 1757, in Paris's Place de Grève before thousands. The spectacle began with Damiens, stripped to a shirt, paraded in a cart holding a 2-pound burning wax torch as amende honorable before Notre Dame. At the scaffold, executioner Charles-Henri Sanson first burned his right hand, which held the knife, with molten sulfur until flesh charred and bones showed, eliciting piercing screams. Red-hot pincers, custom-forged and 1.5 feet long, then tore fist-sized chunks of flesh from his breasts, arms, thighs, and calves. The executioner twisted and pulled repeatedly at the same spots when pieces resisted, creating gaping wounds the size of crown pieces. Into these, boiling mixtures of lead, oil, resin, wax, and sulfur were poured, sizzling and searing nerves while Damiens remained conscious and shrieking for hours. Eyewitness Giacomo Casanova described turning away from the piercing shrieks as half his body was mangled. Finally came quartering. Limbs tied to 4 horses, later 6 when the first failed, which strained for over 2 hours without success. Executioners slashed tendons and joints at hips and shoulders to aid dismemberment. Damiens stayed aware through much of it, convulsing as limbs tore away. His torso was then burned, ashes scattered. The 4-hour ordeal shocked even hardened 18th-century crowds, marking the last drawing and quartering in France and influencing penal reform debates. It exemplified absolutist monarchy's theatrical vengeance for symbolic injury. Giles Corey, 1692. Giles Corey, an 81-year-old prosperous farmer in Salem Village, Massachusetts, became entangled in the 1692 witch trials when spectral evidence implicated him and his wife Martha. After initially testifying against Martha, then recanting, Corey refused to enter a plea, guilty or not guilty, knowing conviction would forfeit his estate to the crown, leaving his children penniless. On September 17, 1692, the court applied peine forte et dure, an archaic English torture to force pleas. Corey was stripped naked and laid supine in a field beside the Salem jail on Howard Street. A large wooden board was placed across his chest. Sheriff George Corwin then directed heavy field stones, starting small and gradually increasing to hundreds of pounds, to be piled atop it over 3 days, September 17 to 19. The pressure slowly crushed ribs, punctured lungs, and compressed organs, causing agonizing suffocation, dehydration, and internal bleeding while he remained conscious. Witnesses reported him gasping for air as weight mounted. In defiance, Corey famously cried, "More weight," to hasten death rather than plead and doom his family. Captain John Gardner oversaw the process, adding stones personally. By the 3rd day, his body was flattened, ribs shattered, and he succumbed to asphyxiation and organ rupture around noon on September 19. The public execution aimed to coerce compliance amid hysteria that hanged 19 others, but Corey's stoic resistance became a symbol of integrity against injustice, later inspiring folklore in Arthur Miller's The Crucible. Balthasar Gerard, 1584. Balthasar Gerard, a 27-year-old devout Catholic from Franche-Comté, assassinated William the Silent, Prince of Orange and leader of the Dutch revolt against Spain, on July 10, 1584, in Delft by shooting him at close range with pistols. Captured instantly, Gerard faced 4 days of preliminary torture before his July 14 execution in Delft's Market Square. Authorities, viewing the act as heinous treason, devised a sentence brutal even for the era. His right hand was seared off with a red-hot iron, flesh torn from 6 places, arms, legs, torso, with red-hot pincers. He was whipped while suspended, feet crushed in heated iron boots smeared with honey and licked by a goat's rough tongue to intensify wounds. On execution day, still conscious, he endured disembowelment, intestines pulled out and burned before his eyes, followed by heart extraction flung in his face. Finally, quartered alive, limbs severed, his head was removed and body parts displayed publicly. Gerard reportedly showed remarkable defiance, refusing to recant despite agony. The prolonged mutilation, hours of conscious torment, shocked contemporaries and cemented his fate as one of history's most vengeful punishments for political murder. Unnamed medieval man, 13th century Milan. Archaeological excavation near Milan's Basilica of Sant'Ambrogio uncovered the skeleton of a young male, 17 to 20 years old, from 1290 to 1430 CE, bearing unmistakable signs of execution by breaking on the wheel, one of the first archaeologically confirmed cases in Italy. Symmetrical perimortem fractures shattered both ulnae, radii, tibia, and fibulae, consistent with systematic blows from iron bars or hammers, while limbs were tied spread-eagled across a large wooden wheel. Medieval sources describe victims lashed to the wheel, limbs smashed in sequence, starting with shins and forearms to avoid immediate death, bones pulverized while avoiding vital arteries to prolong suffering. The broken body was then woven through the wheel's spokes, limbs threaded grotesquely, and hoisted on a pole for public display as a deterrent. This anonymous man likely endured days of exposure, shock, dehydration, infection, and excruciating pain from compound fractures and nerve damage before a botched beheading. Cuts on occipital bone indicate incomplete decapitation ended it. The precision fractures and historical context point to judicial torture for serious crimes, reflecting medieval Italy's harsh spectacles of justice. René Hartevelt. On June 11, 1981, 25-year-old Dutch student René Hartevelt visited the Paris apartment of 32-year-old Japanese classmate Issei Sagawa at 10 Rue Erlanger under the pretense of translating German poetry. Sagawa, harboring long-standing cannibalistic fantasies, shot her once in the neck with a .22 rifle as she read aloud, killing her instantly. Over the next 2 to 3 days, he engaged in necrophilia with her corpse multiple times before meticulously dismembering it in his bathtub, removing organs, filleting flesh from breasts, thighs, buttocks, and calves. He consumed portions raw, savoring texture and taste, cooked others in a frying pan with seasoning, and photographed the process obsessively. As decomposition advanced, he packed remains into 2 suitcases, attempting disposal in Bois de Boulogne Lake before arrest on June 17. Hartevelt's death was swift, but the extended posthumous violation, cannibalism, sexual desecration, and documentation rendered it profoundly horrific, fueling global revulsion when details emerged. William Wallace, 1305. Scottish resistance leader Sir William Wallace was captured near Glasgow in August 1305, tried for treason in Westminster on August 23rd, and sentenced to hanging, drawing, and quartering. Dragged naked behind a horse from the Tower of London to Smithfield amid jeering crowds, he was hanged but cut down alive to preserve consciousness. Executioners emasculated him, burning genitals before his eyes. His abdomen was slit, intestines pulled out and burned in a fire while he watched. His heart was reportedly removed. Still breathing through much of the disembowelment, he was beheaded, then quartered. Body parts dipped in tar and sent to Newcastle, Berwick, Perth, and Stirling for display, heads spiked on London Bridge. The multi-hour public spectacle maximized terror for rebels against Edward I. György Doza, 1514. György Doza, charismatic leader of a 1514 Hungarian peasant crusade turned revolt against nobility, was captured after defeat. Nobles devised a sadistic execution, bound naked to a red-hot iron throne for an hour, searing flesh. A glowing iron crown and scepter burned his head and hands, mocking his kingship. Red-hot pliers tore chunks of living flesh. Starved rebel captives, some his followers, were forced to eat the roasted meat from his wounds under death threats, committing forced cannibalism as he endured conscious agony. His brother was hacked apart before him for torment. After prolonged suffering, remains were quartered and displayed nationwide, shocking Europe as exemplary cruelty against rebellion.